All right.
Tanya just looks confused. She's like, what's going on?
I'm very confused.
Everybody does. Everybody looks at us like, what? Why did it get so weird? For All Mankind had a ton of Star Trek alum behind the scenes.
For All Mankind was really only for people with Apple TV.
For All Mankind was a look at what could have been.
For All Mankind was a fractured fairy tale of the Apollo program.
Dark.
That was the most poetic.
I was going to say, he wrote that beforehand.
I did think a little ahead.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fallingtower's Watch the First podcast, the podcast in which we watch the first episode of a series so that you don't have to. This one was 68 minutes long, by the way, so thank us later. With us, as always, the co-captain, the co-tag team champion in our one-team YouTube whatever, Michael Kenyon Rosenberg.
We're the tag team champions of all of our channel on YouTube.
Mankind on YouTube.
We're also joined, of course, you already know him, Dr. Mohamed Noor, occasional science advisor for Star Trek, the Dean of Natural Sciences at Duke University, by the way.
Hi, thanks for having me as always. I always enjoy being on Watch the First.
We've also got, oh boy, we've got a planetary scientist and professional Martian, Tanya Harrison, Tanya of Mars.
Hello.
That is the coolest.
I'm also a
handle.
Doctor. Just saying.
Dr.
Tanya
Harrison
Tanya of
Mars.
We should ask you that ahead of time.
We could have assumed probably. If you're,
It's okay.
I actually thought of that before we recorded, and I still forgot. You know,
It's all
sorry.
right. I'm not actually offended.
But that is the coolest Twitter handle of all time, Tanya of Mars. Everybody check that out. How could you forget Tanya of Mars? More on that later. What about Mars? Well, you're going to find out. Today, we are
don't forget about our other co-host, the incomparable.
Not a
be
doctor.
compared to
Ryan T. Husk. Hey, everybody. Nobody would compare themselves to me. So here we go. This is Watch the First. Of course, if you'd like us to review a show, just type in WTF and the show in the comments below. Like if you want us to review Star Trek The Next Generation, just type in WTF The Next Generation or TNG or Star Trek TNG or whatever you want. WTF stands for Watch the First, of course. Let's get into it.
What else could it stand for?
I wouldn't even venture a guess. Today, we're doing a review of Apple TV's For All Mankind, Episode 1, entitled Red Moon. That's a lot of stuff to say at the beginning.
Red Moon.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and get started, right? What's the first thing we do, Michael?
I always have to remind him because he never remembers. But I think he also just likes to hear me say the title that he made up, which is our first segment, which is called Predictaments, where we put ourselves in a predicament by making our predictions about what other people thought about this show. And now Ryan's going to throw it right back to himself to make the first predicament.
I never came up with that name. Let the record show. So, yeah, Michael and I.
He still loves it when I say it, though. We've
known each other for like 20 something years, so we can usually predict. Tanya, you're going to be guessing in the dark. It's going to be real tough for you. Mohamed's pretty good at this. Here we go. Michael, I predict that you like this. I don't think you were, oh, this is beautiful, over the moon about it. But I know it's only going to get better from here, guys. Tanya's like, what the hell have I done? I don't think you were over the moon about it. I think you liked it. I think you wanted to like it, and this gave you enough to continue to hold on to that hope.
Mohamed, you think I was not over the moon, but you do think I landed on the moon.
Yep, perfect landing. It was a little rocky, though. Mohamed, I think you liked it even more than Michael. I think you liked it very much. That's all I got there. Tanya, I think you I think you also loved it. By the way, everybody, Tanya works for NASA. So be on your best behavior, everybody at home. She's listening. I think you like this very much. I think maybe you'd even seen this before. I can't imagine people working for NASA that wouldn't at least be curious to watch it. I think you may have seen it before and really liked it. But that's what I think. Michael, what are your predictions?
Ryan does not like much. He is not really a lover of much television that we review on this show. He loves Star Trek. So anything that's Star Trek related, I think that he loves for the most part. But most other things that we have reviewed, he is pretty sour on them. And I think that he's sour on this. He mentioned up top that it's 68 minutes. He hates watching long shows. He gets distracted easily. And I feel like he got distracted many times during this show. And he's going to give it a negative review score. Doctor, I think both liked it because they're both science nerds. And science nerds love science shows. So
we nitpick them to death.
Tanya, you ready to do some predictions?
Oh gosh, I mean, having just met all of you, I'm not sure I can make an accurate prediction, but I would guess, Mohamed, as a fellow science nerd, you probably really enjoyed this show. Michael,
I'm just a regular nerd. I'm not a science nerd.
Just a regular nerd. I mean, if you're still a nerd, then I would think that you probably enjoyed it. Ryan, I mean, you've got like an OG NASA shirt on, so I feel like you're like repping the generation that this is from. So not literally just your shirt. You do not seem old enough to remember the Apollo era, but that makes me think that maybe
you'd be
you would have enjoyed it as
surprised.
well.
Well, those are some very interesting guesses.
Bold
Mohamed,
predictions.
yeah. What do you think?
I'm gonna have more positive predictions. I think that I think Michael liked it a lot. I'm guessing Michael might even be like in the 8.5 to 9 range. I actually think Ryan liked it a lot too. I mean, because Ryan does like science a lot. I think he likes history. I mean, I agree with about the length thing, because that probably knocked it down 1 point. But I don't think much else would have knocked it down further than that. So yeah, I think I can imagine both of you being in the 8s. Tanya, we did just meet, but I mean, again, you work for NASA. So, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist by any means, but I didn't see much there to nitpick, because I know sometimes what scientists can be jerks about nitpicking things to death. I didn't see much there to nitpick, and you don't seem like somebody who's like, a jerk about nitpicking things. So I think you might even be higher still. You might be even the 9s. We're gonna rank 1 to 10, just so you know.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the kind of person that's like, I can't enjoy this if it's not scientifically accurate. It's like
that's
stuff that's made for entertainment. Suspend disbelief and just enjoy it.
That's Ryan all over.
Yeah, like, she just showed that constellation and called it this, but it's actually that.
I feel attacked.
I don't pay that much attention.
I was gonna say, do you feel attacked, Ryan?
Yeah. So everybody at home, you've gotten a lot of hints. Make your predictions now, either in the live chat or in the comments down below. Do you think I liked it? Do you think Mohamed liked it? What about Tanya? What about Michael? And while you're making your predictions, Mr. Michael Kenyon Rosenberg is going to tell us what this show is even about.
I love this part.
In an alternate version of 1969, the Soviet Union beats the United States to the moon, and the space race continues on for decades with still grander challenges and goals. In this episode, NASA is in crisis as the Soviets land the first man on the moon in 1969, the beginning of an alternate history.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
That was
Awesome.
wonderful.
Okay, so by now everybody's made their predictions. They're going to find out pretty soon if we actually did in fact like it. But we got to hang on for another minute or two, because we're now going to make some comparing and contrasting of what we expected before we watched this first episode versus later on what we actually got. So Mike's okay. He's raring to go. Go ahead.
Once again, Ryan loves it when I introduce these segment titles. And this is a segment that we both love to call this segment Expectations. It's this crossroads between what we expected versus what we got. Expectations.
Huh? So, so without giving anything away, Michael, before you watch this first episode of For All Mankind by Ronald D. Moore, by the way, we should get into that later for sure, which is just a thing. What did you expect, Michael?
So I really had never heard of the show. I have Apple TV. I have an Apple TV. I had Apple TV Plus for a little while, but still I never came across this show while I was browsing what's on there. The only thing we really watched is Schmigadoon. It's kind of a fun, like, comedy, musical comedy. Anyway, I digress. My point is that I had never heard anything about the show until Ryan mentioned that we should review it. And there's something in the back of my mind that tells me that he said it was a science fiction show. And so that's what I was expecting, a science fiction show on Apple TV.
By the way, we should also mention that we do take suggestions. That suggestion came multiple times from our friend, Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, like dozens of times. So
she's the one that said it was a science fiction show.
It wasn't really a suggestion. It was more like a demand for several months. So we finally acquiesced. Mohamed, before you watch this first episode, thanks, Anne-Marie. Before you watch this first episode, what did you expect?
I'd heard of it. I'd seen a lot of positive publicity about it in Trek groups online. I'd heard, of course, about the various Trek connections. You know, Ronald Moore being one of the writers, Naren Shankar being executive producer, Doug Drexler and the Okudas, you know, being consultants on sets and design and things like that. I knew it was an alternate history, but I honestly didn't know anything else about it. I don't actually have Apple TV, so I'm always like, I don't want to add like a 7th subscription. So I kind of left it out there, even though I'd heard it was really good, but I didn't know any of the details of what actually happens in it.
Mm-hmm. Tanya, did you have any expectations before you watched this first episode?
I was in a similar boat. I didn't have Apple TV. I didn't want to subscribe really. Meanwhile, all of my space friends were like, oh gosh, I don't know if I should say what they said because I don't want there to be spoilers, but they were insisting I should subscribe to Apple TV to watch this show. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I care enough. But then when I heard Rod Moore was involved, I was like, okay, well, that means it's probably good. I guess I should probably check it out. So this podcast was actually a really good excuse to finally be like, sit down and watch it. Because usually I'm so busy, it's hard to make time to watch anything new lately, which makes me sad. So this was a good excuse to finally watch it after everyone's been telling me to for so long.
Fallingtower cures sadness, everybody.
By the way, I want to tell everybody that Apple TV Plus is only $4.99 a month. Mm-hmm. So that's way cheaper than most streaming services.
Apparently it's free for like the first 3 months if you have like some kind of Apple product.
Right. If you buy a new Apple product, a lot of times you get it for I had it free for a year after I bought my Mac. But it would be way cheaper to own it for a year though than buy a new Mac to get the free 3 months. I agree. But if you're going to buy a Mac anyway, then you get the free year.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of which, I'll tell you guys what I expected. The first I'd heard of this was from our friend, Mr. Mark Zickrey, who wrote for He-Man, Smurfs, some Star Trek episodes, Sliders, Babylon 5, right? I remember one time in a meeting with him, he was telling me, by the way, Ronald D. Moore is developing this show about if the Soviets actually landed on the moon first, and you know what happened, and he went on about that. So, and then he told me again and again about it. So I knew that this show was going to exist, and it sounded really cool and interesting. So I loved the premise. And then it did come into existence, and it still wasn't enough for me to watch it. Especially the Apple TV thing. Yeah, we don't need extra stuff. So that's what I expected. I expected a show in which the Soviets land on the moon first, which creates a different kind of timeline. And what I expected was, my mind kind of went with that and thought that this should be one of those shows that just oh man, I can never remember this word, but the word that takes the show that takes place in it, in multiple time frames. It's somebody's got to know what I'm talking about. Okay.
I think it's called a show that takes place in multiple time
No,
frames.
anthology. Thanks. Anthology.
Oh,
So, I thought it was going to be like an anthology series that just kind of continues on, like episode 1, it takes place in the 60s, and then it's in the 70s, and then it's in 2000s. Suddenly we're in the 2200s, and just this whole alternate timeline. But like, that sounds really awesome. But that's what I expected. Michael Kenyon Rosenberg, what did we actually get?
Well, I would not call this show a science fiction show. It's more science fantasy because it's more of like, this could have happened. It's like this, I guess that's still fiction, maybe fantasy fiction. I mean, it's science as far as it has to do with like the moon landing. But it's not like the hard science fiction that I was kind of expecting, that I thought that Ryan had told me. Maybe I'm the idiot, but probably Ryan is the. But what I got was it was just an alternate history about the Russians landing on the moon first. I had no idea about that before I started watching it. But then you've got all the astronauts getting all pissed off, like, oh, mad because I didn't land on the moon first like I should have, but it wasn't in the mission log. Yeah, that's what I got.
What did you actually get, Mohamed?
I actually found this show very enjoyable in the sense of it being this alternate time. Like, wow, this is a really creative idea. And actually, what I liked about it just about as much as the science was a lot of the history aspects to it. Because there's things like that I don't think about so much anymore. Like, what were things like? I mean, I wasn't alive when the Apollo program was, or when that part of the Apollo program was going, but I'd forgotten, like, as a little kid, just how scared we were of the Soviets and how much we hated them and things like that. Because my first thought is like, why are they being so harsh? This is still a really big deal. But no, I mean, I remember, because I was born in the early 70s. I remember as a little kid, like, we were under the impression that like the Soviets were going to nuke us at any point in time. Mm-hmm. So it's, we're in the middle of a proxy war with Vietnam, with all this stuff going on too. It was hard to get myself initially into that headspace, but it was fascinating. And there was all sorts of, we'll come back to later, all sorts of little Easter eggs that were going throughout that I thought were very enjoyable.
Tanya, when you finally did watch this first episode, what did you actually get?
I honestly forgot at first that this was an alternate history. I completely forgot that the show was about the Soviets landing on the moon first. And so as you're sitting there, this isn't much of a spoiler because it happens right at the beginning, but as you're watching everybody with bated breath waiting for the moon landing to happen on the news, and then the guy starts speaking in Russian, I was like, what's going on? Oh, right. This is the entire premise of this show. But it felt so historically accurate moving up to that, and the scene setting and just everything. Like, they did such a good job that if you didn't know that's what the show was about, it really threw in this curveball. And then as it went on, just how many pieces fell into place of like historical accuracy and like you said, some Easter eggs here and there that just made me smile. I was like, wow, they paid a lot of attention to the detail in this, which made me pay really close attention watching the rest of the episode.
Well, I'll tell you what I got.
I
got something that, since I already knew the twist at the beginning there, when that happened, I was just like, man, I bet this would be so much cooler if I didn't already know that. And I immediately just wanted to like show it to like my dad or something, because I'm like, there's no way he knows about this show. I just want to show it to him and see his reaction when the guy starts speaking Russian. Like, that would be really cool. Great
idea.
It was mesmerizing at first. And then, I did drift a bit. I didn't drift, but I was just kind of like, okay, it was at first it was mesmerizing again. And I really loved the intro. And then it was just a little less. It was still good, but it was a little less mesmerizing to me. I wanted to see just kind of things progress more quickly. But that's what I actually got. It was a pretty good show, actually. I don't know where you guys want to go with this. That twist at the beginning, I thought that was delivered so well.
Very well done.
and knowing what's going to happen, I was just like waiting, like, how are they going to do it? Oh, he's going to speak Russian. Well, he's totally going to talk Russian. So, or I thought he was going to like plant that communist,
Right.
that red
That's what I was
communist
kind of waiting
flag,
for too.
and then where it's like dun dun dun, you know. But the Russian speaking was also really cool.
We're waiting for a translation. Here it is.
By the way, that
I
was
do
Michael
this for the
Harney
Marxist-Leninist way of life.
Michael Harney of Orange is the New Black. That was the news anchor guy.
Oh, the Walter Cronkite equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Well,
was interesting that long pause there that was building up. It was interesting just seeing how like the angry faces of everybody through the whole process. Like, wow, everybody looks like really mad. You know, it was fascinating. It's still like a momentous occasion, and to some extent, like we already did kind of lose the space race. I mean, Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space. I mean, we did already kind of lose, and this was just, you know, another blip where in this alternate timeline we didn't win, but.
I think people forget that. I mean, Americans lost in everything other than landing on the moon, essentially. So we didn't really do this well.
was it accurate though that when they said that they came within 8 miles of the moon? Did that actually happen, or is that alternate timeline as well?
It did, yeah. That was one of those nice Easter eggs to see that they like really paid homage to Apollo 10. And Gene Cernan, that was on that mission, he said he thought that they specifically didn't give them enough fuel to land because they're like, those guys, if we do it, they're just gonna go for it. So I feel like they captured that kind of maverick personality of the old school astronauts really well in all the people that they cast for these roles in this episode.
I was wondering
Ed Baldwin
about
is
that too.
fake, though, right? Ed Baldwin's not real. Ed Baldwin, the main guy.
Yeah, they changed the names of the astronauts for Apollo 10, which threw me off a little bit because they were throwing in actual names like Gus Grissom. And then when they started mentioning them, I was like, wait a minute. I actually Googled it because I was like, I'm pretty sure that was not one of the Apollo astronauts. So I had to check. But yeah, was not on that mission.
I did wonder about
really
that.
Filmed the whole thing though, right? I mean, just it was all staged and they filmed it on Hollywood set, right?
That's actually what my shirt is. It's like an Apollo NASA Vision moon landing film crew shirt. I don't know if you can see that.
That's
awesome.
Hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this was one of the most expensive series ever shot because they insisted on shooting on location.
Yeah.
But I did wonder about that. Like you mentioned, Tanya, that sorry, Michael, that you mentioned that Maverick Spirit. I did kind of catch myself wondering. I was like, were they really like that, or are they just souping it up for Hollywood? You're saying that they actually were kind of like, hey, rough and ready. Let's get crazy.
Yeah, they were like swaggering rock stars back in the day. It's so different from the way that NASA kind of allows astronauts to have a personality or doesn't really allow them to have a personality. It's so sanitized now. It's kind of heartbreaking. I feel like we're missing out on a lot of enthusiasm around the space sector when it comes to NASA because they're not letting people have these big personalities anymore. And that's why we're seeing a lot of attention move toward sort of the private space sector, because you don't have these crazy astronauts anymore. You've got crazy Elon Musk, and people are like, that's interesting. Let me see what this person is about and what they're trying to do.
Be careful. You're talking to the media right now.
You know what would bring that free will and spirit back is stingrays for everybody.
I was gonna say
that was
that was a great scene.
Freaking cool when they all come out and the music's playing and it's like the slow motion and it's just a parking lot full of beautiful stingrays. I was just that was the one part I actually had to rewind and watch again because it was just so beautiful. What was the song? I remember I loved the song too.
It was
the broken-hearted thing.
Yeah. What becomes a broken heart?
Yeah.
Anyway, that scene was just glorious. That whole ride and the beautiful cars and all that. Michael, you like cars, or you used to? Did that excite you? Yeah,
I love Corvettes. I would love to be an astronaut in the '60s and own a Corvette and just speed off into the bar. I did think it was a little lame where they're all in the bar, they're all singing the song, and it's like
I loved it.
Loved
it.
So the bar is actually a real place too, or it used to be,
it is.
And they tore it down, or they closed it down maybe I think like over a decade ago now, because they used to hold a big planetary science conference nearby there every year. And we'd go hang out at the bar because it's the Astronaut Bar. And when they closed it down, everybody was really heartbroken. It's like, this is a piece of history. How is this not like a national monument? How could you let this happen? This was really sad.
So what became of all you brokenhearted?
I know, that was perfect. I was like, wow, she really served that one up perfectly.
Well, it turned out there were too many of us. They had to move the conference to a bigger venue, to a place where there was no exciting bar to hang out at anymore.
That's so cool. So it's a real place. I love that.
It was, at least, yeah.
It was, yeah.
Do we know if they did all like stingrays? Is that a real thing?
They all had cars like that. I can't remember. One of them was actually on the national. I'm in DC right now. One of them was on the National Mall in DC for the Apollo 12 anniversary. I forget which. I think it might have been John Young's car. It was just parked out there in front of the Capitol building with a little sign in front of it. I think it was a Corvette.
Wow, that's cool. Mohamed, how did you feel about the singing and dancing in the bar? That was amazing and wonderful.
You didn't prompt me there at all. I thought that was great. I mean, that wasn't my favorite part of the episode, but I thought that was really enjoyable and things like that. I was a little nervous when they were doing the bottle throwing there. Like, oh, I don't love that. That seems a little dangerous. But
well, the waitress started. She's the one that's got us clean it up. So.
Well, they goaded her into doing it.
They forced her.
Yeah.
How do you say no to an astronaut? You're like, okay, fine, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you say no to 100 screaming drunk astronauts? You're like, okay, I'll throw and I'm gonna have to stay late and clean this up. And whoever needs stitches from the explosion, yeah. I don't know. That was, I didn't too much care for that. Oh, I saw a friend of mine in there. That was pretty cool. Curtis Fortier, shout out to him. He was one of the reporters that was like, hey, yeah, you could have been first though. And I was like, hey, that's my guy. Anyway, so shout out to him. I'm sure he's watching. That was really cool of him. All right, let's talk about our favorite character. I had a lot of problems even knowing any of their names. I think the one lady that was maybe married to probably the main guy, her name was Margot.
I thought Margot was the one who was sleeping in the office.
Right.
I thought Karen was the wife of the main guy.
And that's what it is.
Yeah, Karen Baldwin.
I usually get subtitles going so that when they say their names, I can see who it is, but they didn't really help me out too much there. And we know there was Neil and Buzz obviously in there, but other than that, it was tough for me. Do you guys have any favorite characters?
I had a hard time keeping track of all the guys. I was like in Mission Control, there's German guy, there's buff guy, and there's German young guy. Yeah. That was kind of the way I was remembering them. It was like, I liked buff guy and young guy more than German guy, but they were all okay.
I liked Gordo mostly for his speech when he was asking, like, "Oh, come on, man! You had to have planned a speech for if you were going to be the first guy on the moon."
No, I came in peace.
Yeah, his speech was pretty good. I mean, I liked the more emotional part before the joke, but the ending was good too.
Who was your favorite character?
Margot, probably. She was the genius that kind of didn't have the confidence to speak up, but she kind of got reamed a little bit for that. But I mean, it seems like he's friends with her father. So maybe that's, why, maybe he's a scientist too. And that's why she kind of went that route. And maybe he schmoozed with his buddy to get her a job at NASA. And his buddy's like, hey, you gotta, if you're going to do this, let's do this. I mean, you got the answers. But I just looked it up, and Margot Madison was based off of a real person named Margaret Hamilton.
Oh, cool.
Was that I've seen some meme about some NASA lady who wrote all sorts of code, but she's actually Jack Black's mom. Or does anybody know if that's true? Or
those are two different people. If you think of the meme with like the stack of paper, that's Margaret Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
So she wrote a bunch of the code for the Apollo missions.
Nice.
And the paper is like her stack of code.
You're
right.
There was also there was also a really good Easter egg shout out near the beginning of the episode where I think it's Margot walking down the hallway and a blonde woman walks by and she says, "Hi, Poppy." That's a reference to Poppy Northcutt, who was like the first female engineer in Mission Control. So she came in on the Apollo 8 mission. She's also just a BAMF. Like, she's on Twitter. Very cool. like telling stories about back in the day, and then she's also like a big, you know, activist nowadays. So she's pretty awesome. It was nice to see just like that little nod to her. So maybe her character will come back. Who knows?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what a BAMF is, but I just pieced it together while you were talking. I got it.
I didn't know how
it.
PG-13 this had to be. So
we are
swearing.
PG 18 and a half for sure.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, Karen was the dude's wife. I don't even remember who the dude was, but I thought she looked a lot like Julia Roberts, by the way. I was like, is that like, does Julia Roberts have a daughter? Like, she looked very familiar. I don't know if I've seen her in something or if she's related to somebody, but I really liked her a lot. I thought her acting was really good. I think I was probably most impressed with her acting, honestly. And there was also like, there was a Tracy in there somewhere. There was a Pam. Oh, Pam was the bottle tosser, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of characters. You're right.
Did we even
remind me of Game of Thrones, where like you meet all these
which one's your
Starks,
favorite,
and they're
though,
like, how
Ryan?
do you keep track of all these Starks? They all kind of look the same.
That's how
Well,
I
it's
was
a little
first time I saw it.
confusing when you're used to like the actual names from history, and then you've got some fake names thrown in there. So I was getting confused, like, oh, okay, this is a real person. This one's not a real person. Hold on. I had to go back. Like, I didn't catch Gordo's name at first. I was trying to like write down his quote. And I had no idea who the hell he was. So I was like, oh, hold on, I gotta rewind.
Mm-hmm.
One place where I laughed out loud, though, this wasn't a person, but just a quote that was in there. This was one of the history Easter eggs that had nothing to do with the space program at all. Was the comment about how Ted Kennedy had to cancel his party in Chappaquiddick to
Yeah, you loved that one.
That was, and laughed out loud. I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I was thinking, like, in terms of history, that actually may have had a bigger impact than the Soviets getting to the moon before us. Because I mean, at that point, if the Chappaquiddick incident didn't happen, it's quite likely Ted Kennedy would have been president at some point in time in the future. Mm-hmm. So that was a massive redirect there of history by having him not go to this party.
And the only reason I know that, Mohamed, is because you told me to look it up yesterday. You're like, there's a huge nod. So after they said it, I said, okay, I heard the thing. Let me do a quick Google. And I'm like, oh, I get it. Okay, that's cool. That works.
Do you want to tell just our viewers that may not know what, just for our viewers, not
so
for anybody in particular that's on the show.
So, July 1969, Ted Kennedy was in a car with a young lady. I can't remember her name. And there was an accident, it ran off the road and she died. There was allegations, though. There were, assumptions that maybe they had some sort of thing going on and that maybe this was not entirely an accident. And this is the kind of thing that this came up repeatedly throughout Ted Kennedy's career, and this was one of the things holding him back all the time. And, it was a terrible accident, but, was it an accident? And what was your relationship with her? Yeah.
And it is said that he would have likely run and won to be president in 72 and or 76, I think it was. And then he did eventually run in the primaries in
or something.
Yeah, in 80, I think it was.
It was 80.
And he had like a 37%, and didn't quite make it. But anyway, I only know that it's fresh in my brain because Mohamed was like, you better. I'll be
look
so
up
pissed.
Chappaquiddick. I just Google Ted Kennedy Chappaquiddick. That's all I'm going to do.
I'm like, how am I going to spell
you
that?
You told me already, so I don't need to.
You do Ted Kennedy CHA and it'll fill in.
Yeah, but it all worked out. Michael, to answer your question, I think my favorite character is probably Karen because of the name. No, but because I was just impressed with the lady's acting. I was like, wow, she got it in the eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was really pleased with that. And the acting was good all around. I didn't really see any bad acting. I personally enjoyed it, but I didn't see a ton to really pull out great acting from people. So I'm not, who knows?
Did you all think
I don't remember seeing any great acting, but upon second consideration, I guess there wasn't that much bad acting. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing, and by not a huge fan, I mean I didn't really like it.
Nice.
Oh.
Here we go. Finally, it took us like
This
20 minutes, but now, boy, oh boy, this is when Mike throws his gloves off and he like pulls your shirt over your head and starts. So what didn't you like about the writing, Michael?
The pacing, the believability of some of the characters themselves, the words that they were saying. So
everything. Just everything.
Can you cite specific examples?
Well, the biggest one that stands out is like, okay, you're drunk and you're in the bar, but like, why are you blabbing to this reporter? Like
He's drunk.
Okay, you're drunk, and like, why is his buddy like got going around along with it? How come he's like, hey, maybe you don't, hey, remember the code? Like, it's this code that he doesn't even tell his wife what he's thinking, but then he gets drunk and then he's just like blabbing everything. It seems like that if there's a code that if he won't even tell his wife when he's drunk, then it seems unlikely to me that he'd just go and blab to some reporter. And he just kept going and going and giving him more and more and more. It's like, that does not ring true to me.
Well, the only part of that I had a little qualm with was I was like, okay, they didn't have micro cassette recorders back then. So did the reporter just memorize his quote? Like,
Probably,
I mean, I'm not saying
reporter.
it's impossible, but I was like, that was a direct quote. How did he remember that direct quote through all the stuff? So that was the one qualm I had with that. I don't think that's necessarily bad writing. I was just kind of like, it made me think. But what do you guys think, Mohamed and Tanya? Were you pissed off about that like Mike was?
I thought it was fine. I just figured he remembered it and wrote it down like a minute later as soon as the guy turned his head, like, write this down. it didn't bother me.
I figured he was just really pissed off in that moment. So he was just like, I don't care who knows I'm angry about this.
Did you guys find it preposterous that a drunk person would overshare?
No leading the answer there.
So first of all, he's a dude in the 60s. So they drink a lot. I mean, if you've ever seen Mad Men, every scene they've got a drink in their hand and they're just tossing them back. So a few beers is not going to, and a shot maybe, is not going to like make this NASA astronaut go blabbing his mouth, especially when he's breaking this code that he's made such a big deal to his wife. And my biggest thing is like, if you can get drunk at a bar and tell somebody, why can't he get drunk at home and blab to his wife?
Okay. I think on that last part was he just never got that mad. Like that, like he was madder than he probably had been the entire time he'd been associated with the program. You know, that was my thinking on that. But
yeah. And maybe he's trying to like keep some separation, like, oh, I'm gonna keep whatever I feel about that stuff like out of the home to keep it away from my wife and my kid, if you can, make that kind of boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fair thought.
I thought that they did such a good job of making it feel authentic, like 1969. It really made me feel like I was back. Michael, you were not alive. You don't know if
I am not.
Like,
I was not alive.
When I was in 69,
however,
back in college,
I gotta say, my wife is a huge vintage fan. Ryan knows this about her.
Okay.
She loves vintage clothing. She loves vintage furniture. And her comment was that it was not authentic.
Oh.
The wardrobe was not authentic, nor the scenery.
Well, it felt like it. They fooled me. I love that.
Did you all know that, or did you predict? Predictament. Did you predict that the lander people had actually? I actually thought they were dead. Like when they went down to when they lost contact. I actually had goosebumps when the radio thing came back. It's like, oh, they made it. So I thought that was extremely well done. I mean,
that is an excellent question, because I thought the same thing as you, in that as soon as the Soviets did the landing and they kind of got all stressed out about it, I did way ahead. I was like, wow, as a writer, it would be brilliant now if when Apollo goes, they crash and they die, because they were building up so much. Like they kept saying like, and if we don't make it, then the Soviets are going to take, they were kind of setting it up to where you're almost expecting failure. And I was like, that would be great writing. And then I started thinking, well, actually, but then if they do land, then it kind of makes it to where each country's trying to one up each other. And that sets up a really good series. So I was actually going back and forth trying to figure out which way they went with it. What do you think, Tanya? Were you going one way or the other?
I definitely thought they were dead, especially as time was going by. It's like, oh, there's no way they survived. I was trying to look as they're showing like Michael Collins's view through the telescope. Like, does it look like they crashed? Is there debris everywhere? Mm-hmm. So that was a good twist at the end. I totally didn't expect them to be alive.
Did you did it actually impact you? Did it actually make you feel something when you thought that they were gone? Were you affected by it?
Yeah, because I think my brain again forgot that this was not a historical documentary. And so I'm just sitting there waiting for them. And the part about him coming in over rough terrain is also totally accurate. Apollo 11 was running out of fuel. They couldn't find a place to land. They were like heading toward a crater. Neil Armstrong's trying to like guide it around. The comment about the 20 seconds of fuel left, that's like actually something that's in the transcripts from Apollo 11.
Wow.
I was like, so I figured they were just doing exactly what happened. And then as it all cuts out, I was like, oh right, this is a TV show. I have no idea what's going to happen. And that was kind of cool, like to be so surprised from something where like, you know, we've seen, at least me as a space person, I've seen like a dozen plus documentaries about Apollo 11. You've seen these things over and over again. And so when you have something where it manages to surprise you, it's really novel.
I still found myself very happy when they turned out to be a lot, even though once they dragged it out for a long time, that's when you're like, okay, they are gonna surprise us with they're actually alive. But even still, me, the curmudgeon, I found myself smiling, be like, yeah, all right,
USA.
Michael,
I mean,
were
for
you
me,
jumping
it was
joy?
just, well, I had a feeling they were going to be alive because otherwise the show's over. There's no, yeah. If the NASA Apollo program and NASA gets shut down, then there's no race. There's no.
I guess the question is, would NASA feel the need after the first crew failed to try again, or would they say, this is too dangerous, we've ceded space to the Russians? Because I was having that same mental debate. I was like, oh, if this failed, that's not a great sign for the future of the program. But I think that they wouldn't just sit back and let the Russians take over space. Like it's too big of a stake to not just keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I really liked, I think Ed is the character, the main astronaut guy they've been following, when he gives his speech about, you know, NASA needs to be taking risks and, you know, people sign up for this knowing that they're going to die. It doesn't stop us. We need to keep doing this. Like, I thought that was a pretty realistic comment. And it's kind of eerily applicable to the space industry today as well. Like, hey, we got to take risks and it's not always going to be safe, but that's what happens when you're working in an environment like this.
Tanya, let me ask you though, after in real life, when we did land on the moon, did the Russians go back, or did the Russians ever land on the moon, or did they continue their program? Or
no, the Russians never landed any humans on the moon. They beat us in like every other way to the moon with robotic missions. And then after we landed, they stopped. And that's probably why the Apollo program fizzled out to begin with. You know, we did it and it was really hard to justify to the public after that. Why are we spending so much money on this?
Right.
There's not really any reason to keep going. And without the public support behind what was happening, it lost a lot of political support as well. And eventually, I forget how many, I think there were 20 planned Apollo missions when they can't cut it off at 17. Wow. There were definitely more that they had considered, but there just wasn't enough motivation to keep going after 17. They're like, let's stop. And now we've never gone back. And this is actually, it's great. Whenever you're a space person riding in an Uber and somebody asks you what you do, it leads to interesting conversations with people. And I have a lot of people asking me questions about the moon landing. And one guy who was probably early 20s, maybe, he said, you know, I'm not sure if we actually landed on the moon. And I was like, okay, what?
Get him. All right, here we go. Beat him with logic.
No, I love to have genuine conversations with these people. I'm like, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, you know, I feel like we could have, but if we were able to do it in the 60s and the 70s, why haven't we gone back? And I told him, I was like, that is an excellent question. And the answer really is just politics and money. And he's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it was cool to actually get the chance to talk to someone about it and not just be like, oh, you're a fool. Of course we landed on the moon. What's wrong with you?
Do you feel as though you convinced him? Or you just gave him enough to think about it?
He seemed like he was processing it. And I was explaining kind of, you know, what was going on in the world at the time. You know, you had wars happening. It was really hard to justify going to the moon when you're in the middle of like the Vietnam War. And we see some of that with like Nixon's statements that are interspersed throughout the episode. So it's cool. Like a lot of people they don't get the chance to talk to someone that's involved in this kind of stuff, or just scientists in general. So when they find out you're a scientist, they just open up with so many questions, and it's really fun to actually like see see the curiosity and see the kind of things that they want to learn more about.
Mm-hmm. There was a little Easter egg in that sentence when you said curiosity, by the way, but we'll get to all that kind of stuff a little bit later. We're almost there, everybody. Everybody's like, stop teasing stuff.
One thing we didn't talk about yet. What
Yeah.
about the Aleda? I think her name was the little Mexican girl who's trying to cross the border. That was an interesting like subplot that didn't seem connected to anything else. So I mean, I assume it does later connect, but
yeah, the commercials. Yeah, what did you guys think of that? Yeah,
I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, I was like, how is this all? I mean, I'm just assuming that she's going to at some point become part of the space program. I'm thinking that that's how it's going to tie in. What do you guys think?
Maybe they're just like planning like years ahead, you know, like when she grows up and then she'll be an astronaut or something like that.
Her children.
In season 17.
Yeah.
I figured they would tie in a little more of like, oh, they're taking advantage of the fact that everyone's distracted by the moon landing to cross the border. But that didn't feel like enough to justify so many scenes. So something has to happen with her character. Just not entirely sure what it's going to be.
Right. Yeah. With her specific character, because if they were just showing people doing that, then they wouldn't really give them that much of a plot. They would just kind of show them doing that. So we make that mental note. Other things are happening. People might want to divert funds to other things rather than NASA, like you were saying. Can we talk a second about how many Star Trek people are involved in this? I'm pulling up IMDb.
I didn't see any in the show.
Right. They're all BTS. Ronald D. Moore, of course, I believe this was, he's fully credited with the created by thing. We also have Bradley Thompson and David Weddle, who are in like 100 Deep Space Nine episodes as like story editors, and they've written some. They're like a team. They're always together, and Sirach and I are always talking about these two people because it's always Bradley Thompson and David Weddle. They're always together. At first, they would write a few episodes, and then they became like senior story editor, I think, for like the last two seasons, and they did stuff.
That's kind of like the progression of like writers. You start out as like a PA, and then you become a staff writer, and then you eventually work your way up the producing credits.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also Joe Menosky, who's written several Star Trek episodes. I recognize his name. Naren Shankar, I believe you mentioned him, right, Mohamed? He was a science advisor, right?
He was in the earlier seasons or like not in the last season, Next Generation, but earlier in it, he was, Mm-hmm. But before Andre Bormanis took over that role.
Andre Bormanis is another one.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's all the ones I caught.
You got Drexler and Okuda.
Oh, right. Doing, but that's really interesting because they usually do futuristic things, right? I mean, they're sci-fi guys, but they were consulted for art direction and set decoration or whatever for 1969. What's up with that? I was hoping you had some insight.
I don't know.
Yeah. I guess we'll.
So they're the people my wife should be mad at.
Ooh, interesting. Well, spoiler, we're going to be talking with Doug Drexler also for Virtual TrekCon, so we can definitely ask him about all that. You've probably already seen it actually by now. Everybody at home. You probably already just saw it. But anyway, did this feel like Star Trek to you guys in any way?
Not at all.
It didn't feel like Star Trek. I thought it was great, but it didn't feel like Star Trek specific. While I was watching, I never thought this feels like a Star Trek episode now.
Right, especially like Star Trek in the 60s, like looked super cheesy, and this is like looks more realistic.
Yeah, but it was nice to see in the opening credits all those familiar names come by. It's like, oh, this is gonna be good.
The reason Michael mentioned Star Trek in the 60s, one of the many reasons, is because, as everybody knows, our previous episode we just reviewed was Star Trek, the original series episode, The Cage, which had a lot of 60s flavor to it because it was in the 60s. Yeah, but I was expecting the writing in some way to be reminiscent of Star Trek. Like I felt like there would be something in there, and I didn't catch anything like that. No. Nope.
No references to Captain Kirk, which I mean, Like
They
Star Trek,
could.
the original series came out in like 66. And so, yeah, they could have like everyone
Yeah.
who is in the show
Yeah.
could have watched the show. I know it wasn't that popular back then, but
Just have like a mug on someone's mission control
Right.
station or something like
Yes.
that. A little nod somewhere.
yeah.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to go on record and say my favorite scene was when they're racing stingrays and then singing What Becomes of a Broken Heart so happily and cheerfully. And it just made my heart sing at 1 a.m. And that's all there is to that. Sorry, Michael. Did you guys have a favorite scene, Tanya?
I guess I already said it, the Gordo and his speech, like if he was the first person on the moon, the emotional part, I thought it was very sweet.
What about you, Mohamed?
It was when I mentioned too, I got the goosebumps with the radio signal coming back, like, oh my God, they're alive. So for me, that was top notch.
Did you have a scene you liked at all, Michael?
It's like the end credits.
The very end of the end credits. And I can tell you my least favorite scene.
Okay, but first tell us your favorite. It's a compliment sandwich. You gotta say your favorite.
Scouring my notes, trying to look for anything that I liked.
The Corvette.
Yeah, I guess the Corvettes. I mean, just seeing a line of Corvettes was pretty cool. And I guess them racing. I did not like the scene where they're all singing. I thought that was super lame. I thought, so now I'm getting into what I didn't like. I thought the guy comes in and said, John Glenn actually said the word fuck. I was like, that was lame. I mean, for us, it's lame. I mean, back then it's probably a bit, oh, he said fuck. Oh, that's a bad word. Yeah, that was lame.
I feel like I have some memory of him actually having like a reputation for having a dirty mouth. So it might have been a reference to that, but I could also be making this up. I think this is a real thing. You can call me out in the comments if I was wrong.
I mean, he could have been a gruff guy. And so that could have been just like more historical accuracy. But I think this, the line itself was dumb. And the worst, this is the thing that I hated the most. Like when there's like, oh, shut off the mics and the cameras. And he stands up, the guy in mission control stands up to give some big speech. And this is, if this, if it doesn't work. And that whole speech was dumb. And I thought that scene was dumb.
Wow.
Actually, in my notes, I like that speech with.
Wow, this is amazing.
Sorry. Maybe it's because I'm not a science guy.
I'll tell you what wasn't dumb. I really liked the line by Marge, maybe. There's a lot of names here. I think it might have been Marge.
Margo.
I think it might have been Marge. There was also a Marge in there that was there in like 2 or 3 scenes. Kind of older.
I think that was Deke Slayton's wife, right?
Yeah, I think she was the one that said, duty, honor, country. Sometimes you have to pick two, right? And then, of course, you can't help but be like, oh, yeah, let's see if you pick those. Oh, yeah. And then you pick those two. I really like that line. It's kind of like, the production, the line about, making movies, where it's like quick, what is it? Fast, cheap, and good. You can pick two, basically.
Same thing with auto mechanics.
Space missions.
Yeah.
You don't have to add safe to that too.
Oh, yeah.
That should never be one of the things that you're forced to pick between. That's the tip of the spear. Everything else is secondary. Except for back in the 60s, they were rough riders.
Like, we got this.
Yeah. So, Tanya Harrison, Dr. Tanya Harrison, that is, of course. It's time to talk about you for a moment, if that's okay.
Sure.
First of all, first things first, can you please tell us what that book behind you is and how cool is it that you wrote it?
Oh, man. The sun went down while we were talking in my time
it's dark
zone.
now.
But here you go. I can't get up to turn on a light or I have to disappear. So yeah, I conveniently wrote a book with a very similar title to the show called For All Humankind, which I actually thought about in the family trying to cross. So the book is about the memories from folks around the world who watched or listened to the moon landing live as it happened. But I specifically interviewed people that were not from the United States, because we see tons of documentaries and hear lots of stories from people, you know, oh, I grew up in Ohio and I was inspired by the astronauts, so I worked for NASA, or, you know, I watched the moon landing and I grew up in California and, you know, now I work for NASA. That's cool, but I feel like that's the less interesting story. So I wanted to know, how did everybody else in the world view this event? Was this a human achievement or was this an American achievement? And so it turns out to be very difficult to track down people that are not from America and were old enough to remember the moon landing. So I had to employ lots of, does anybody have a grandparent or, you know, a great uncle or something that knows someone? And managed to track down 8 people. One of them actually was someone that grew up in Mexico. So we got a story from Mexico. But the stories range really wildly. The youngest person was a 5-year-old girl growing up in rural northwestern India, and she was listening to it on the radio with her family. And then the oldest person was a 44-year-old Holocaust survivor from Lithuania who had immigrated to Canada via Rhodesia at the time and South Africa. Saw that South Africa was starting to feel a little bit like Nazi Germany with apartheid, and he was like, I got to get my family out of here, so they immigrated to Canada. And but I also wanted to track down people that were really not space people. They weren't scientists, they were just people that happened to remember this thing in their life. And so it was really cool to hear everyone's stories, and the common theme across all of them was that we didn't care that it was an American mission that was going. Most of them didn't really care about the space race in general, like if it was America versus Russia. They were just like, we thought it was amazing that humans were landing on the moon. Like we as a species had accomplished this bigger thing. And it ties really well into Gordo's speech about you know, he was hoping that humans seeing men on the moon would help people look up and look past their hate and see something bigger. And that was kind of the consistent message from these people. And even on Apollo 11, there's a little tiny microchip that they engraved messages on from a bunch of world leaders, like 100 plus countries. And a lot of the messages on that microchip were very similar things. Be like, hey, from space, we can look back on the Earth and see that there are no boundaries. Maybe we will work together as a species and we'll stop, you know, all the infighting that's going on in the world right now. So it was a really beautiful thing to see.
Wow, that's
you feel
awesome.
The current space program encourages that? I mean, or not the current space program, but the current like privatization. I know people often sell that when they're talking now about privatizing space, that, you know, people will go up and they'll see there's no boundaries. I mean, I think William Shatner said that when he came down, but some of the other private corporations have made this. Do you think that's likely?
I think so. It probably sounds like a cheesy marketing line to maybe non-space people, like, oh yeah, space is this transformational experience, I'm sure. But it's such a consistent message that like every astronaut says they go into space and they come back feeling like they need to be better stewards of Earth. And seeing William Shatner's like emotional reaction to just a few minutes in space, the fact that he could barely speak at first was really powerful to see. I was like, you know, in my head, if only we could get more people to have this experience, maybe the world would be a better place.
Wow. Yeah, all that, honestly, all that curiosity and perseverance really paid off with that opportunity. Speaking of which, what's so funny?
What did the Vikings think?
Tanya, what do you do for NASA, by the way?
Well, so I actually work for a private space company now, but I used to work in science and mission ops for cameras on a bunch of different Mars missions. So I worked on Opportunity, Curiosity, Perseverance, and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, working on camera systems on all of those. And then some mission support for Spirit back before Spirit died. Sad face. My job for a while was actually a Martian weather girl. So I would monitor the weather on Mars and then let people that were operating the rovers and the landers on the surface know if there was like a dust storm heading their way, to make sure that hopefully the rovers wouldn't die in the process. So that was honestly the coolest job I've ever had. Not gonna lie, because there's only like 5 people in the world that can say that they've ever had that job. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have to stop everything and just say, can you please tell us what kind of weather Mars has? Because that sounds like the coolest thing. As soon as you said that, I was like, what kind of weather does Mars have?
This surprises a lot of people. They assume it's just like this dead red rock floating off in space, but Mars is actually super dynamic. It has these global dust storms, not anything like what you saw in The Martian for anybody that saw that, but you'll get dust that stays in the atmosphere for months at a time, and sometimes you can't even see the surface from orbit that they get that bad. But there's also little water ice clouds that'll streak by, and we can actually see them from the surface with the rovers. They kind of look like wispy clouds that you would see in the upper atmosphere here on Earth, cirrus clouds for any nerds out there. So it's mostly those, lots and lots of dust storms, and then some water ice clouds. And every once in a while, the dust storms will threaten the rovers. And so you got to batten down the hatches as much as you can. You can't drive them out of the way. They don't move quickly enough. You can close dust covers and try to not use too much of the batteries so that the batteries won't die. Unfortunately, one dust storm did end up killing the Opportunity rover. I was on shift when that happened, which was really sad. But it lasted 15 years and it was supposed to last for 3 months. So it was wildly successful regardless.
How predictable is the weather? Are they like seeing it from orbit coming? Like, how do you know when there's a dust storm coming on Mars?
So the nice thing is the weather on Mars is super predictable because it doesn't have any oceans. So all of the weather is pretty much driven by topography, so elevation. So you'll see weather systems coming through like big basins or giant impact craters, and it happens in the same places at the same time of year, year after year. Even like global dust storm season, it's kind of like hurricane season here on Earth. You know when they're going to happen, but you don't know how big they're going to be. You just know like these 3 or 4 months are going to be tricky. And we've been monitoring the weather on Mars now almost on a daily basis from early 1997 with Mars Global Surveyor through today with Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. We've been taking daily global images of the entire planet to monitor the weather patterns. And I think even Mars scientists, a lot of them don't realize we have this data set. So the weather on Mars is way more predictable than the weather on Earth, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
Are you allowed to say what you're working on now too, or is that like top secret?
Oh, it's not secret. Now I work closer to home. I work at a company called Planet that builds teeny tiny satellites, like huggable size satellites. And actually we image the whole Earth every day to look for change, which is what attracted me to this company, because that's what I was doing on Mars with these cameras. And when I heard that there was a company doing the same thing on Earth, granted, we're looking at the surface, like impacts of climate change and stuff like that, not at weather patterns. I was really fascinated. And so I had to figure out a way to get, like, my PhD is in Martian landslides. So I'm like, how am I going to get a company that works on Earth to hire a Mars landslides expert? Because I thought it would be cool to like try the, Bay Area startup tech company kind of world. And it's been really exciting. It's exciting in a very different way than working on Mars rovers, but it's been a fantastic experience.
Mike, did your ears perk up when she said Bay Area? Where in the Bay Area?
The company is in San Francisco.
She's in DC.
Yeah. So I live in DC, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, I love DC, but I moved here to work out of our federal office to be close to NASA. And now I work for our main office in San Francisco, but I just work from home. So
cool. The reason I asked is Michael and I are from San Jose. So when people say Bay Area, we kind of like lean in a bit. Wow, that's all really cool. And everybody that's watching, I'm sure, wants to hear you answer questions forever. So everybody at home, make sure to follow Tanya. Check out all of her website and social media stuff. It's going to be in the description box below. Michael just pointed. That's where it is. Be sure to click and check all that stuff out. Tanya is obviously fascinating and amazing, and we can't wait to learn more about you. But before we do that, everybody's dying to know, what is the bottom line on this show? Mike's doing the karate chop. That's his bottom line signal. It's the terrible twos, the final two questions of the show. The two most important questions. Mike says it's the bottom line, but it's really the terrible twos.
We call it the bottom line, and then we post a separate video of just this section titled the bottom line as well. So it's the bottom line.
Mohamed, tiebreaker?
I'll go with bottom line too.
Bottom line, yeah.
So it's still a tie. Okay. All right. So
Tanya just
final-
looks confused. She's like, what's going on?
I'm
right
very
now? Why-"
confused.
Everybody does. Everybody looks at us like, what? Why did it get so weird?
Yeah.
We were
Why do you
on a
guys even
roll.
bother
Everything was fine.
arguing about this when it's obviously called the bottom line? So
Well, the people in the live chat love it. They love it. So
no, they
the
don't.
final two questions. Question number 1, Michael Kenyon Rosenberg. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this first episode of For All Mankind?
Well, I
Entitled
honestly
Red Moon.
found Red Moon. I honestly found Tanya's description about weather patterns on Mars more interesting than the show.
It's pretty awesome.
Her brief description over the 68-minute long show. Yeah, but it is about space. There are all those Easter eggs. Like I think that whole code that came up when they were practicing like that. I think that happened during the real mission, right? And there was like that kind of like I think the lady like stepped up and said, "Oh no, that's nothing. Don't worry about that." And like, so they were able to land. I remember hearing about that. So that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. Astronauts and space and all that. That's all nice and cool. I'm not the biggest fan of like alternate history stuff. My dad would love this show. He loves like alternate history things. He lived through the moon landing. He's a big space science guy. He was like he was really into like model rocketry and like he like worked on some project to help this private group launch a rocket into space. But
He was in the Air Force.
he would
or
be
something,
really.
wasn't he?
He was in the
Something like
Navy.
Navy.
Yeah.
Same thing.
The other thing that I found real interesting, probably the one thing that I found interesting about this show is all the historical context. You've got 1969, so you've got the moon landing, you've got Woodstock, you've got the Vietnam War. They mentioned, the Chicago 7, which just happened the year before. Civil rights is brand new. Those laws just I think just recently passed. And then there's an interesting documentary called Summer of Soul that my wife found the other day, and it's basically all about this Harlem Cultural Festival, where it's like basically you look at the footage, it's all Black people. It's like young ass Stevie Wonder. You got like all these cool acts from like the 60s, Black musicians, and they're playing in Harlem, and it's but basically sometimes people call it the Black Woodstock because it happened at the same time as Woodstock. And so all this stuff, all this context, like if you think back, man, there's so much going on in 1969. So that having all this in the backdrop of everything else that's going on, that's kind of interesting to me, but not enough for me to give it a good score. I'm giving it a 3.5.
Ooh, that was way
Wow.
off. Oh man.
Wow.
Yeah, that you built that up pretty hard. You're basically what you were saying is these are all the things that were going on that I didn't see in this episode. Mohamed, on a scale of 1 to 10, actually don't go any lower. On a scale of 3.5 to 10, what would you give this one?
I'd give it a 9. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very engaging. I thought it was fascinating. I like the space elements. I like the history elements. I mean, one question that was nagging me through when the landing first happened, like, so did Nixon call Khrushchev and congratulate him?
Oh,
Probably not, but I don't know. Actually, maybe Tanya, did Khrushchev call Nixon on our moon landing?
I don't remember. That's a good question.
All right. A 9 is pretty darn good, though. Tanya, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this first episode of For All Mankind?
I'm also kind of leaning toward a 9 out of 10. I really liked it. It's probably one of the best things I've watched in a long time. Very, very biased being a space nerd. So
Right.
it's cool to see the non-space nerd perspective on it, because we know we're so biased when it comes to this kind of stuff. But yeah, I will definitely watch more episodes. Everybody that I know that works in the space industry has had nothing but great things to say about this show. So it definitely resonates with space people hard. Like they're all in for it.
Just to
All
let
right.
you know, if you don't want to give it a 10, you can go up to 2 decimal points.
We've had people
I
do
would
like
say
8
I
decimal
wouldn't give it.
points.
Okay, I wouldn't give it a 10 just because there was like a brief part, maybe like half an hour in, where I did feel like I was starting to get slightly distracted. I think overall I didn't find it too long because it picked up again later, but I can't remember what was happening, but I did notice around the half hour mark, I was like, how much of this is left? So maybe it could have been a little bit shorter. I also think at the end, the drawn out nature of showing that they were still alive was too long. Like it that could have been probably half as long, and it would have still been like a good surprise to end with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's time for me to drop a lot of bad news on a lot of good people. On a scale of 1 to 10, well, first of all, Mike is being very coy here. First of all, let me just say that I think the concept itself is like a 10. I mean, it's a great idea, right? As soon as somebody tells you what the premise is, you're like, you're hooked. You're very curious. They didn't seem to really it doesn't seem like they're really taking it in the direction I expected. I thought it was going to progress, maybe not in this episode, but I don't think that episode 2 is going to be now 5 years in the future or 10, I don't think it's going to progress like that. I don't even think they're going to do that season to season, which is also possible. So the concept itself is a 10. The execution is, maybe around a 6, because there were some, like I said, mesmerizing parts. I thought that the intro theme was just stunning. Like it was beautiful. The music was beautiful. The visuals were great. Everything else was good. And so I'm going to do a nice soft landing at 7.8.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah,
That's good.
Yeah, and that's just because I'm a curmudgeon. I don't know where Mike is coming from.
They did have a good logo. Yeah, the logo was good.
Yeah.
They ripped it off of the NASA worm logo, so they don't really get to take credit for making that.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So
Michael's going down 3.2 now.
Okay, now the final question of the show, and really the most important question. This is what everybody wants to know. The bottom line really, truly is, for the purposes of this podcast, we all had to watch the first episode of For All Mankind. But now that the podcast is over and we're free to move about the internet, Michael Kenyon Rosenberg, of your own volition, would you watch the second episode?
No.
Huh.
Nope. Is that surprising given that I gave it a 3.5?
Figured it was going to be no, but maybe it was enough for you to be like, I'll watch episode 2, see if it gets a little better.
No, not for me. It's not. I mean, I appreciate, people that like alternate history stuff, and I'm not an alternate history guy. I guess this show had one huge historical inaccuracy, which is that Russia did not land on the moon first. So
yeah, they didn't do their homework. By the way, that's part of what I liked about the concept, I should have said, is that I really love that kind of thing where one little thing in history can just have a chain reaction that just changes everything. And my mind has wandered into those directions in the past. So it's really cool to see somebody actually doing that. So it's a shocking no from you, huh, Michael? We wouldn't have guessed. Mohamed, would you watch the second? Maybe, right?
Oh yeah, I would totally watch the second. I don't know that I would buy a Apple Plus TV subscription to do it, but actually, when I tried rewatching just the last few minutes of it because I was being distracted when I watched it last time, I wanted to rewatch it. Saul Rubinek popped up. Like, I remember him being in this. Then I checked, like, oh, somehow I can actually access the second episode too on my iPad for free. I'm not sure why, but
no, I think it's the first 3 episodes are available.
That's why. Okay, well, there you go. So I'll probably watch all 3 of those.
What role did he have?
I only saw it for like a second because I was just trying to go back a little bit, and I was like, I don't remember this scene. And then I was like, oh, this is the wrong episode. So
that's why. Okay, yeah, he's also a Star Trek guy.
Yeah.
Tanya, boy, this is nobody knows where you're going to go with this one. Would you watch the second episode of Your Own Volition?
I'm probably going to go watch it right after we're done here. I need to like prove Michael wrong and be like, no, it's actually really good. He's gonna be like, I don't care, Tanya.
Wow. She's got her finger on the trigger right now. She's like, the second you guys say bye, I am watching this thing. I actually toiled with this a tiny bit.
Did you?
Yeah, actually, because honestly, I could walk away. It
was a good ending. It's true.
Yeah, I could walk away happy, and I don't really feel the need to watch the second episode. I would watch the second episode anyway because I do like the concept. I do like the concept, and I like the people behind it. You know, I'm very impressed by Ronald D. Moore's previous works, so I do trust him very much. So yes, I would. So that's it, Michael. You're the odd man out.
Now I'm the curmudgeon.
All right. So speak for your damn self. So here we go. We did it, everybody. Tanya, this was so cool. Thank you so much for joining us and playing with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm sorry the sun went down. It was beautifully light in
Who
here
could
when
have
we
predicted?
started. Like,
stick
not like I have
to
a PhD
weather
in
and
that or
Mars. Yeah. And Mohamed, thanks as always for joining us
Always fun.
well. Always a great time. So if you'd like, everybody at home, if you'd like us to review a show, again, in the comments below, just type in WTF Three's Company or WTF Fraggle Rock or WTF SpongeBob Square Butt, that dumb show.
WTF Station 11.
Station 11. That stands for Watch the First, everybody knows. And what I'm trying to say is this podcast was an exploration into Michael's mind.
This podcast made me wonder what you guys were smoking while you were watching this and wondering where I could get some.
This podcast made me realize that not space people don't like space stuff as much as space people.
This podcast shows just how poorly I can guess Michael Kenyon Rosenberg's guesses.
Well, you heard it here first, everybody. Mohamed cannot read Michael. So thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. And always remember what Michael Kenyon Rosenberg likes to say.
Don't forget to register to be an organ donor. I don't have my Donate Life sign right now, but you can go to Donate Life, and I think it's donatelife.com or .org. Just type in Donate Life and go there, and then type on you click on register, and then go register to be an organ donor. If you're not already, if you are, just do it for fun. Why not? Just do it again. So that way you can help somebody get a kidney transplant, or if when you die, you can get a heart transplant or a double lung transplant, and you can help somebody else live, even though you have passed on to the way beyond the moon. And I don't even know what I'm saying at this point. The other thing I love to say is don't forget to watch the first of things.